I had a lot of plans for this summer. A lot of improvements, a lot of pasture management, hay management. Was wanting to work on a little bit of a farm store, so there was a lot of plans in the works for the summer. Animals were doing well. They were ready to calve. They were going to start coming, and everything was looking really positive. And then on April 28th, I was getting phone calls and messages from people asking me if my property was okay. And I hadn't listened to the news. I didn't know what was going on. And somebody said, well, there's a wildfire. And I asked where. And so I looked it up on the map. I'm like, oh, well, that's way south of me and to the east. I said, no, that one's not impacting me. But while I was on the Alberta Fires map, I just kind of scrolled over to where my property was, and there was a big red flame right next to my property. I'm like, oh, well, what is this? Called a neighbor out there, and yeah, they had said the fire broke out just south of their place. And so Sunday, the 29th, then we went out there to go see and to see what was going on. And in that time that we were out there for the afternoon, the fire had reached my property line. And that's when I started to get a little worried. So, and just with it being so dry, you knew what the potential was. Just watching this thing come, there was just a wall of fire that was headed towards us. So all the plans I had for the summer changed. The property out at Wildwood, I was first purchased it would have been 10 years ago, and started a breeding herd out there, and that's slowly been growing over the years, and had reached about 50 cows, but cut myself back down to 35 just to be able to manage things better. And that's where I've been sitting. So it's been a 10-year long project to establish a herd out there, and a working farm basically. So that property is 140 kilometers from my home. So it also I had to have a little place to stay there, so I built myself a little cabin in the bush, and that was where I could stay overnight if I needed to, because making the trek back and forth daily was just not feasible. And so I had a little cabin tucked away in the bush, and were plans for building outbuildings, and they just hadn't happened yet. On April 29th, I learned of a fire burning 5 miles south of my property out at Wildwood. On April 30th, that fire reached the south edge of my property line. On May 3rd, I got the dreaded news that the fire actually went into my property. June 13th, 6.5 weeks later, I'm still finding hot spots in my property and the surrounding trees. So on that first day, when the fire got up to the property line, there was no evacuation order yet, which is strange considering how all the evacuation orders came out afterwards. So there was no evacuation order out yet, so we were literally watching the fire come. Nobody was telling us to get out of there. I mean, we stayed a safe distance as it got closer. But then my boyfriend was with me that day, and he asked, what do you want to do? I said, I don't know. I don't know what to do. And he kept bugging me a little bit, and I said, I don't know what to do. I said, I can't leave, but I also don't want I can't watch my world burn. So there's this conflict of emotion where you can't, it's almost like you're physically stuck. You can't move, but you also know that at some point you have to leave, and it's out of your control. It's absolutely out of your control. You just pray you've done everything you can to keep your animals as safe as possible, and pray for the best. So I understand the need for people, when those evacuation orders came out and people didn't leave their homes. I understand the need to be there. You don't want to leave. It just seems like you have this need for control to, if the fire comes, I can do something. And reality is you can't. So, but I get it. There's that need to stay, but also the gotta get out for your safety type of deal. The fire came to my property line on the Sunday, and they held it there till, I think it was the Wednesday. I think it was the 3rd. And it was the third where I was on my way out, actually. I was hauling out a piece of equipment to start making some fire breaks. And that's when I got the news that the fire actually went into my property. So those days, you're sitting there trying to, like, what can I do? What can I do to make this as safe as possible for my animals? Like, what's the best thing for them? And you're trying to make all these decisions. And at some point, I even said it, I feel like I'm just spinning in circles. Again, you have this need to do something, but you don't know what to do. So you just kind of end up spinning in circles and doing this, doing that. And so I guess at the end of the day that you've done everything you could. Because I think if you go through a situation like that and you don't want to, I should have done this, I should have done that. It's, you'll kind of kill yourself emotionally if you start doing that. The problem with this fire is just the dry conditions that we have this year and the wind. That fire moved 7 miles in 5 hours. Like, there was no time to plan anything. Because I got asked a lot too, are you going to get your animals out? The thought crossed my mind, but how do you move bison? And they were all the calving season was starting. So, thinking about it and how it would go, we just decided that the risk was too high. Animals were going to get hurt, people were going to get hurt, and we just literally didn't have the time. There was no time to prepare to even get them ready to haul them out of there. Fires are unpredictable. There's always fear that the worst could happen. I mean, it's, having witnessed fires in the past and having had some exposure to it, I didn't think that this one wasn't going to affect me, or that there was no potential it could. They'll get it under control and I'll be fine. That thought never crossed my mind. It was always what if? What if, right? And then just, things were looking a little positive, and then you get that phone call that, no, I'm sorry to tell you it went into your place. And you kind of almost already knew that the potential for that was really high, just with the conditions and where it was and the weather, and you kind of knew it was a very real possibility. I think a lot of times, like, you think what it's going to happen when a fire goes through, but there's so much that we learned about fires that we didn't know. And I think the biggest one being that, and I heard it being said a couple times to me, it's like, well, now it's gone through, you're out of the woods. And you know what, we're 7 weeks into this and we're not out of the woods. The fire's still there, it's still active. I don't know that I have any hot spots left on my property, but I'm surrounded by them. And I have a chunk of bush on the north edge where the bison were when the fire went through. That's still a very real threat. There's a fire guard on either end of that. And we've also learned that fire guards in the right weather really don't do much. So they have their purpose. They really have their purpose in the fight against the fire. But when those winds pick up, you watch this fire, it crossed the Pembina, it crossed Highway 16, it crossed Highway 22, when the conditions are there, there's no stopping it. Once the fire hit my place, the outpouring of help was, the offers to help, they came from everywhere, right? I had asked my sister-in-law, can you put a quick post on Facebook as to where to get fire hose? I had so many people replying back, not where to get fire hose, but hey, we can help. I have a tank, I have a pump, just can we come out and help? It's no, you get overwhelmed because you're just not in a state of mind to organize anything. And it's really not the place. At that time, it was not the place for so many people to get involved. You know, the first responders were doing their jobs, and I also didn't want to bring a situation into it that would have made their jobs harder, because I can understand how bringing a bunch of people in that aren't trained makes their job harder, you know. And so they're the experts with this, and I kind of felt we needed to make sure that they had the space they needed to work. And so it was hard to not feel guilty with all the offers of help and having to say no thank you, because it's just, you can't, it's hard, you can't, you know. I know you want to help, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can at that moment. So, because it's chaos. It's absolute chaos. There is no structure, there is no organizing, there is no, you know, I'm literally working from one minute to the next, and that was a tough one for me too, was just the emotion of how to tell people no when they were so willing to help. It's been exhausting, and you do realize that you need to take care of yourself. And I tried, but there's also this need. I couldn't stay away from there. You know, having livestock, you could apply for a permit to get in, because it was still an evac zone. So you could apply for a permit to get in, and if they let you in, you know, they basically wanted you in and out. But so there was just always this need to be there. You know, the fire had gone through, but there was still the real threat that even more could happen. And so, you know, you sit at home and you think of a reason to go out there. And then that was getting exhausting. And then I lost my cabin because it burnt. And so I was sleeping in the back seat of my truck, and you know, you're poking your head out every half hour or so just to make sure that you weren't surrounded by flames, because you weren't quite sure what was going on. So, but you know, and again, that struggle of not, realistically, there's nothing you can do if something happens, but just needing to be there to do what you can. You lose a house, and that's a loss. But when you're watching this and you know that there's living creatures in there, that their fate is in your hands, basically, to some extent, that's an emotional roller coaster, that one. Interestingly, there was not a lot of smoke. The worst thing for me actually was the soot, the ash and the soot. And it would get everywhere. It's like everything's black. So when the fire hit my place, I was already on my way out there. And I actually got a phone call from Alberta Forestry and Fire. And it was the heavy equipment supervisor that was on my place while it was burning. And so somehow, somewhere, there was a connection to me through all the people that were there, heavy equipment operators and first responders. And so I got a phone call from him. And he wanted to know where he could cut the fences, because he knew there was bison in there. We don't want to let them out, but we need to get a fire guard through the bush, through the north fence line. And the more we talked, I told him, I said, well, I'm here. Like, can I get in? Like, can you bring me in, and I can cut the wires for you? And he said, yeah, that'd be great, right? So he got me in there while the whole place was burning. I'm trying to cut fences without the rest of the fence getting down, because that was actually the field the bison were in, is where they wanted to put the fire guard. And so we were taking care of that. And then after it was all kind of over and done, I was talking to one of the other first responders, and he said, yeah, the bison were running around pretty good. While the fire was going through, the bison were actually pretty panicked. It went through really fast. Like, I had gotten there maybe 2 hours after the fire had gone through or started, and by the time I got there, it was mostly gone. So they said once the fire had gone through and the water bombers had taken care of the worst of it, the bison actually settled down and kind of hunkered down in a corner. Now, I was out there every day pretty much for the following 2 weeks after that. It took my cows probably those 2 weeks to come out of that corner. They just like, we're safe here, we're not coming out of here. The bulls, they came down, kind of wandered into the burnt areas while we were working down there and just kind of sniffed around to see what was going on. They started calving right then. So before the fire started, I had 3 calves. 5 days later, I had 30. So that's a stress response. And I'm just so immensely grateful that they were okay. All of the losses that I had, like the fence lines and the cabin and some other structures, all those losses don't matter because the bison are okay. For whoever's going through a situation like that, just letting them know that you're there for them when they need you, that's about all you can do at that moment. There's not much you can do physically for them. I mean, in my instance, I needed people to help at the home place. I still had animals to take care of at home. I still had the farmer's market to do, right? It wasn't like I was going to be gone for one weekend. I had to start finding a situation, that I could still keep my booth open. So family stepped in with the farm and with the market. A lot of help was coming in the form of people delivering food to the first responders or to people that were helping, or supplies or clothing, or, in that respect. You're hearing so much on social media, either one side or the other, regarding first responders. They're either doing things good or they're not. Had I not been able to go onto my property while the fire was going through, my bison would have been gone. I'm very grateful for the work that they're doing, because at the end of the day, those first responders, they're doing everything to help you. And when I hear people talk about, well, they should have done this, they should have done that, they didn't let us help, I have a hard time with that. They're doing everything they can. This is what they're trained in. They're looking at it from a different perspective than us as the landowners and the property owners. They're looking at it from the bigger picture. The wildfire situation right now in Yellowhead County is unreal. It's crazy out there. And understanding that there's more important things in my little corner of the world. So you kind of get pulled in a couple directions, knowing that, okay, well, they need to go save Edson, but my place is still burning, so they have to make those decisions, because resources are limited. There's not a jurisdiction on this planet that can have enough people on staff to deal with the fires we're dealing with right now. There's just not. We had a little bit of a flare-up just north of me, and we were trying to deal with it, and just through one of the connections I made on that day that the fire went through with one of the first responders, made a phone call, and 10 minutes later, a helicopter came and dropped water on it. It's not that, they can't do that all the time or every time, but in that instance, it was, so you form those connections and you have respect for each other. It works out better in the long run, I think. The effects of the fire, there's losses, like the physical losses from, the structures, the buildings. But now there's also the unknown losses, right? Because we are still under threat. The fire is still, like, it is still an active fire. 7 weeks later, we're still in an active fire zone. I still have that bush surrounding me that's still fresh timber that can burn, plus all where the fire has gone through, there's a lot of fuel there. And because of the area I'm in, we're in a heavy peat area. That is extremely hard to get under control. So now my worry is, what are we looking at next year? You know, if we have one of these underground fires that pops up through the surface into an area where there's a lot of dead grass from the previous fall, are we going to go through all this again? My hayland is done. I lost my hayland. I'm going to have to reseed that and reestablish that. So that's a huge cost. I wasn't in the original list of losses because, you know, we've all seen fields come back after a fire, right? But the hayland's done. And that's a hard thing to swallow. I don't know, it's hard for me to talk about losses on my property because my bison are still there. They're fine. I miss them. They're okay. So for me, the losses I had is just, you know, pull up your bootstraps, rebuild the fence, and, you know, go on to fight another day. Knowing that my animals are okay. They survived. Everything else I'll take it. You know, if it had to happen, that's the best outcome. There are losses incurred that are not the direct result of the fire. Personally, for me, I lost revenue as the business was put on hold. I had to cancel processing dates. I had to cancel events scheduled for later in the summer because I can't plan and prepare for them. And I've lost sales of breeding stock as I've had to cancel vets to come in to do testing. You learn so much going through a situation like this. I think maybe the biggest thing I learned was there is no quick response to recovery. You know, I know when the fire went through and 2 days later, okay, got to refence, I got to get this built, got to get that redone, got to get my pasture reseeded, and 4 weeks later, I'm still fighting fire, not being able to rebuild a fence or pound a post, or because you're still dealing with the situation. That was probably the biggest revelation for me during all this, was like, wow, I just really can't get to all the work that needs to get done yet, because this fire is just not letting us. It's not letting us move on. And I think we were all waiting for that day where we could maybe think of something other than the fire. Like, why do we always have to? It became a chore. And I think all of us out there were just like, where's that day where this isn't the priority anymore and we can get on with going back to some of our daily chores or things that have to get done. And you're not even really looking for the normal, you're just looking for a relief. You're constantly worried, you're constantly scared. That fear, that anxiety, that's what we're all waiting to kind of let go of. And I think that's going to take some time. So after the fire, I mean, my world was pretty black, pretty charred for probably about 2 weeks. Everything was just black. And then pretty soon you saw the little, you know, some plants were trying to come back. And what I found really interesting was that 2 days after the fire, the birds were back. So you had this black charred world full of songbirds. And it was just like, oh, okay, you know, the healing is starting. And then 2 weeks ago, there was a group of us. It was my neighbors and a couple of the first responders. We were standing on the road just having a discussion. We saw a black bear cub went across the road into my tree line. And then 2 minutes later, we saw a coyote crossing the road on the other side. And then not 2 minutes after that, a moose cow with her calf came out from where the black bear went. And it's like, that black bear cub and the moose calf probably had a nice little chat as they passed each other. To have nature heal, to see the healing that it's going through, that's been a positive. That's kind of showing you things are going to heal. And the grasses, I mean, you drive around there now, and it's hard to see where the fire was because things have greened up. It looks very different. Like, I mean, if somebody were to drive past my place right now, they're like, oh, what are you talking about? That wasn't a big fire. So, my world was pretty black. So, I mean, there's obviously the dead trees. I mean, that's there, but the world is grainy, and a lot of the help that I'm going to need is not something, a lot of it's going to be in the forms of field work, farm work. Another area is, I mean, feed is going to be in short supply this year. That's a big worry for the fall is the feed supply to secure a source, right? So I think for me, a lot of that is just let me know where things are. That's right now the kind of help I can manage. Financial help is, this property is kind of, it's covered through the main policy I have for the farm here at Devon, right? And really all I did was cover myself for liability out there. So there is definitely a financial hit, an unexpected financial hit. Insurance isn't going to cover, well, for me anyway, it won't cover anything really. Probably already sitting at $6,000 for fencing, just for the urgent stuff, the stuff that needs to get redone right away. Never mind what I lost on those fields that, they can wait for the summer. Maybe do that in the fall when there's a bit more time and, the immediate crisis is past. Reseeding the hayland, considering that I have to have everything custom done, I wouldn't be surprised if I'm looking at a $25,000 to $30,000 bill for that. Just because fuel's expensive, equipment's expensive, and seed's expensive. So there's a lot of costs involved there too. Again, I've lived a very independent, lonely life, but just having made connections over the years, and they stand behind you. It's not just for that one moment, right? They're there for later. That's been nice. One of the unintended benefits of this event has been that I've met neighbors that I haven't met since I moved out there, and getting to know them has been a true pleasure. In the days and weeks following the fire, feelings of appreciation, understanding, empathy, and compassion started to take over. The understanding that realizing how strained the system is with the unprecedented amount of fires this year, appreciation and gratefulness towards friends, first responders, and neighbors for everything they did and are still doing. Empathy and compassion for those that lost homes and livestock, and for those that weren't hit but are still at risk.